Good afternoon, friends. Let me start off by telling you that one of my greatest fears is flying, or just basically afraid of heights. So once I was on a plane, actually one of the times I was on a plane, and I was grabbing the handles on my seat, I began to think of my bucket list. Now, does anybody know what a bucket list is? There's a show in the UK. It's called An Idiot Abroad. It's about this guy named Carl Pilkington who led a sheltered life, and it's about his two friends with him getting him to make a bucket list in the hopes of exciting his life up. But it's actually a gag, as they have a surprise for him for everything he does. For some, making a bucket list, it's a way of a challenge or a competition with friends of things to do before you die. But then there are others that feel insecure about their lives or fearful, like me, and they make a bucket list so they can feel good about life before their death. Today we're going to see an example of a bucket list from the Israelites and also from God. So in the story we read today, Micah, he's the product of the country. He's a farmer. And like some farmers, even now, they don't really like people from the city. But in this case, he had good reason. It was the city slickers that were tricking his friends and neighbors of their hard-earned cash. It was the city slicker judges. They were taking bribes to make unfair calls. It was the city slicker priests who were immoral, they were and corrupt. The city slicker prophets who would tell any story in exchange for a few bucks. It's no wonder that he had a bad name for the cities of Judah and Israel. Here's a quick list of other things he was concerned about the nation's spiritual habits. It was bad enough that they weren't living like spiritual leaders, but one of the reasons was because it was expected of them by the people. The only preaching that people wanted to hear was something like this: disaster is never coming our way. God's in heaven, and he's all right with us. This is from chapter 2, verse 6. Micah even jokes about it, and he says to them, well, suppose a prophet full of lies would say to you, I'll preach to you the joys of wine and alcohol. Because that's just the kind of prophet you will like. You can kind of hear the sarcasm in his voice. One time, a youth said to me, we don't roll like that. And he meant that's not how we do things around here. The Israelites were saying, this is how we roll. And God will say, not really. So now it was time for them to hear from God, a message for them, but as well as us. God saying, this is how you should roll. So the scene that Micah paints in the speech to them is the picture of a courtroom. But in this case, God is the judge, and he's also the prosecuting lawyer. So in Micah chapter 6, verse 1, God says, stand up and state your case against me. And before the defendant is even called to the stand to hear the charges, the jury is shown to be a powerhouse one. It's the mountains and the hills. Verse 1 says, let the mountains and the hills be called to witness your complaint. Whoa. Micah presents his case on behalf of God concerning the people. The charge isn't really stated out, but when you read in between the lines of the evidence, and you pretty much get this message that Israel has grown tired of God and has gone its own way, whether they know it or not. So here's the evidence. When they were slaves in Egypt, God brought them freedom. Micah chapter 6, first half of verse 4. Another one is that when they were without leadership, God gave them Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, the second half of verse 4. When their life was threatened by King Balak, God rescued them again, the first half of verse 5 of chapter 6. Then when they crossed the Jordan River, God was protecting them, the second half of verse 5, chapter 6. So if you notice, clearly the evidence shows God wasn't at fault here. Now, it was Israel's turn to present their case to the judge and jury, which is God. But they don't seem to present any case or evidence for their defense. All they do is ask this question. Verse 6 says this: what can we do to make things right? Let's read that again. What can we do to make things right? Unfortunately, Israel hasn't got the point, and it seems like they're refusing to accept any responsibility of their actions. They basically think that the solution is, let's just pay the fine and then we can carry on with our normal lives, as if nothing is wrong with what we do or what we've done. So they give a bucket list of things that they want to offer as a payment, and the bucket list starts off pretty modestly. This is from verse 6 to 7. Let me kind of state them for you. One is they want to offer bowing before God. Another one is the yearly sacrifice of a young cow. Okay, this is where it gets bigger. They want to offer thousands of rams and 10,000 rivers of olive oil. Then, to put a cherry on top of all this, they want to sacrifice the firstborn child to pay for their sins. I don't know about you, but that's downright dark and evil stuff. You can picture Micah's reaction. You can picture in his head, he's thinking, what? They still don't get it. What's going on? What they were doing was making a laughing stock of the whole meaning of worship of God. Basically, they want to turn it into some kind of national insurance policy. That is, they're saying, well, we can sin as we wish as long as we're up on our insurance premiums at the temple. We can go wild for 6 days. Then on the 7th day, when we come to the temple, we can come in to pray. We can come in to serve communion. We can come in and sing a couple songs and greet people, etc. Micah's word to them is that it has nothing to do with how much you sacrifice, how much you offer, and other religious stuff. Unfortunately, I think we're just as guilty of this as well. We can't buy God's love and forgiveness. It's freely given to us. Micah gives a simple, yet so hard message to what God really requires of us. He says, He has showed you, O mortal, what is good, and what the Lord requires of you: to act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Basically, this is God's bucket list for us to strive for if we're ever going to see the sun shining hope on a cloudy day. It's interesting that this verse is actually on the walls of the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. So let's turn our attention for the rest of this message to these three elements in this part of the passage, and we'll see soon enough that they all seem to affect or they complement each other. The first one is that act justly. There are two parts we need to look at. Both show how our outward behavior to others can hurt or encourage. First is the act of showing justice or fairness, where we do what we can to ensure that everyone gets a fair share of equality in life. That would mean, for example, reporting or prosecuting men who batter their wives or their children. It would mean standing up and respectively putting pressure on the local police department or mayor's office until they respond to calls quicker in the poor parts of town as much as in the richer parts. It's choosing the courage to tell the principal or trusted adult about the bullying you get. It's also being that adult, doing whatever is necessary to support you. In John chapter 8, Jesus shows justice to this prostitute who was about to get stoned by the crowds. And he does this by asking the crowds, whoever has not sinned, to throw the first stone. The other part to justice is one that if it was being done. If one that it was being done, the world wouldn't need to do some of the things I just mentioned. It means that our behavior and how we live our lives to be honorable and respectful and fair to God, then everyone will be living in a right relationship with one another. Let me say it in a different way. Justice restores and also gives dignity to life. Justice chooses their battle wisely. Justice speaks the truth, but also accepts the truth, even when they're wrong. Biblical justice is both. It's righting of wrongs and generosity and social concern, especially to the poor and vulnerable. Let's go to the second part. Love mercy. Before I talk about mercy, there's something I want to point out. We seem to lean more towards seeking justice than show mercy. In James chapter 2, verse 13, it says, "For judgment is without mercy to one who has shown no mercy. For mercy triumphs over judgment." That means if you refuse to act kind, you can't really expect to be treated kindly. A definition of mercy is the choice to forgive and not give punishment or harm. Going back to that story in John chapter 8 about the woman who committed adultery. She was dirty. She was a dirty woman. She was sinful, and she knew it. The crowds knew and were going to do something about it. Jesus knew it, but he chose to show compassion and kindness when she was deserving punishment of some kind. But mercy shouldn't mean that I allow sinful or unhealthy behavior to continue. Think about that for any of you or any of you that are going to take the boundaries course or have taken the boundaries course. Jesus didn't really let her off. He still confronted the issues and the people. And he told her to sin no more. It's kind of sad nowadays when we talk about mercy, it's no longer seen as a good quality, but it's seen as a weak quality. When we look at the movies and television, showing emotions and feelings is seen as weak, but that's not a biblical view. I think for mercy to be truly genuine, it needs to be received as a gift from God. And for us to come to God, God wants us to come to him in our weakness, and that's not a bad thing at all. Anybody can show mercy or kindness or compassion to someone else. But does that mean that they really are kind or loving? No. For me to know what true mercy is, I need to be able to receive it from God first. And that means allowing the mercies of God to transform my heart to be the kind of loving and merciful, grace-giving person that God wants me and all of us to be. 1 John chapter 4 says this, "Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. In this, the love of God was made manifest among us, that God sent his only Son into the world so that we might live through him. And this is where it's inward. If I am constantly acting as if I am right, everyone else, all of you are wrong, my act of kindness, my act of love, my act of mercy is just all fake because I haven't totally understood what mercy from God really means. Mercy must be given to my family too, not just shown at church. Not mercy praise. And it's not for them to know that I'm right and they're wrong, but for God to show us what's right, what's truth. Mercy doesn't hold grudges. Mercy is not fancy words, actions, or titles. Mercy hung itself on a cross. Mercy hung itself on a cross. The last part to that verse, walk humbly with God. Walk humbly with God. It's interesting that the verse, it doesn't end off with loving mercy. And that's a good thing. Because it's almost as if God is saying, last but not least, don't miss the most important part. When you walk, it generally means a slower pace that receives and it's sensitive to whatever touches our senses. But most importantly, it allows us to experience God. To walk humbly makes me ask what my attitude towards God is. Am I far away or am I close to him? Is there anything distracting my attention? Walking says that I'm ready to wait for what God has in store for me and not jump ahead of him. In Luke 24, Jesus appears to two of his disciples walking along the Emmaus road. They don't recognize him at first. They are probably sad and wondering about what happened to their good friend recently. But after walking and talking, they realize it was Jesus all along. Waiting for God to answer is hard, but it's necessary. Missionary Elizabeth Elliot once said this: restlessness and resistance, they can never wait. But one who believes he is loved with an everlasting love and knows that underneath are the everlasting arms will find strength and peace. In Genesis chapter 5, verse 24, it's a strange verse, but it's pretty straightforward because it basically says Enoch walked with God and one day was gone. God took him. But it's not really strange at all because we will all face that reality one day. We're all going to die. So to walk humbly is Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, before being crucified, before dying on the cross. It's him saying, Father, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done. And that's something that we are given as well. Will we say before God, not my will, but your will be done. Walking humbly is being content with what I'm given. Things in my life may not happen as what I want them to be, but I'm okay with it because I trust in God's ultimate plan and purpose for me. Walking humbly is giving up something I'm not ready to give up. I think to put it bluntly, walking humbly means shutting myself up for God instead of shutting myself up to God. After Adam and Eve, they disobeyed God in the Garden of Eden. They hide. But the thing to realize is that God wasn't doing what he usually does. Sorry, God was doing what he usually does. He was looking for them. He asked, where are you? Where are you? He wasn't coming to yell or scold them. The story describes God as having this nice stroll in the park. But we, like Adam and Eve, we hide when we do something wrong because we're ashamed. As a side note, I want to say that nakedness is okay. Now don't get your feathers ruffled. I mean in terms of this story, Adam and Eve, they were ashamed of their nakedness. That is, their wrong choices, their disobedience. But in spite of the right or wrong choices they made, or that we make, God still pursues us with his love and his faithfulness. Nakedness is coming to God in spite of our shame, in spite of our mistakes, willing to receive his forgiveness and mercy. It says, God, I need your help. I can't do this. I can't do any of this without you. And God asked the same question to us. Where are you? Where are you? There's a lot more to this question than we realize, because I think it's more than God wanting to know physical location. You think about it, God knows everything. But the question he asks is directed for us. So ask yourselves today, do I really have an idea of how my life is going? Do I know if anything I am doing is unhealthy or destructive to me or others? Am I hiding from others or even God? So do you have a bucket list of things you want to do before you die? Those may be nice and neat things to have, but don't forget the bucket list that God asks of us. This is taken from the Message version of the Bible. Do what is fair and just to your neighbor. Be compassionate and loyal in your love, and to take God seriously. Nothing else. Blessings to you, my friends.